It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Planet Earth under siege, coming to a grocery store near you sooner than almost any yet dare to imagine. On that note, this new headline reports, scientists warn grocery store shelves may soon be missing pantry-staple foods because of poor crop conditions, emphasizing the importance of sustainable farming. That's from Yahoo News and many other sources. Here's a question. How do you sustainably farm on a planet whose life support systems are breaking down by the day? This is the kind of deception that is now all too common, making people believe that there's just some small little glitch in the system and we can easily fix it. It's not the case. Again, we're back to the Thelma and Louise moment. You can't just put brakes on the car after it crashes to the guardrail. It's not just coming, it's well underway, with the controller-manipulated matrix media doing all they can to distract, divide, polarize populations, keeping them blind to the oncoming train of total collapse on countless fronts. I'm baffled about how few see what's unfolding, how few see just how unimaginably unsustainable all this was, and people still clinging to the idea that it's a matter of elbow room. We could fit everybody in the state of Texas with room to spare, I hear from people. It's not about elbow room. It's about resources. It's about a functional planet, functional habitat without which all of us perish. Crops are collapsing around the world. Fisheries are collapsing around the world, and not just beginning. And statistics you see in certain articles that indicate there's some small problem that may manifest itself in a decade or two, that's blatant, glaring deception designed to keep people asleep at the wheel. And even if it was a decade or two away, which it isn't, it's kicking in the front door now, would that alleviate us from the responsibility of doing something about it so that our children might have some semblance of a future? And I'm also dismayed at those who seem not to care about the plight of others around the world, a plight that is so very directly connected to the, quote, American dream. Resources that are being used here, 5% of the population in America using 25% of the world's remaining resources, conservatively 25%. Does that seem equitable to anyone? And might does not make right, as so many would like to believe. And the heat in California is absolutely relentless, kept under this high-pressure heat dome week in and week out. And there are messages from many around the country that are trying to grow gardens with very little success. And even in the regions that are receiving rain, because that rain is toxic, still no success with the gardens or very little success. Toxic rain doesn't do much good for flora. Forests also imploding. Again, the forest smell gone now for many years because the trees aren't breathing. They're not opening their stomata, their respiratory ports. They're not absorbing carbon and releasing oxygen. They're just dormant, the ones that are still alive. And in the western forests where I live, the fir trees, all of them are in some stage of decline or death, and that is the predominant tree. And other trees not far behind. Fungal infections everywhere. What happens when you take antibiotics in the human body and you kill your beneficial microflora? Fungal infections ensue because you've eliminated the beneficial organisms. Same thing happens in the environment. When you have toxic rain, and let's start with aluminum, which is toxic to all forms, period, no exceptions, sterilizing soils, not just farmlands, but forest soils as well. Soil duff, the surface litter from the forest, leaves, branches, not deteriorating anymore. Again, because the microbiome has been destroyed. Entire ecosystems upended. There are more organisms living below the surface, or there was, than living above. How many people know that? Again, West Coast being fried under another ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat dome, which is absolutely relentless. All too often, even when the sun goes down, the temperatures don't. And we had a flash cool down here last Saturday in Northern California. In fact, headlines everywhere, snow in California, and then the whiplash back to the hundreds. and scheduled to stay there for the foreseeable future. And during that time this week, according to Weather Channel, Chicago had a heat index of 115 degrees while it's snowing in California. And this heat dome over the U.S. West directly connected to Arctic meltdown. Geoengineeringwatch.org first noted this in 2007 when the Arctic ice surface extent was crashing, 100,000 square kilometers disappearing every day near the end of the melt season. And after this is when the climate engineers instituted a particular scenario of high-pressure doming U.S. West, which causes all the moisture to go further north, up and around the clockwise rotating air currents which surround a northern hemisphere high-pressure heat dome, pumping more cooler air into the Arctic and trying to very destructively mask the situation there. When that air circles around that high pressure and comes back down into the eastern half of the country, it's used to cool the most populated part of the country, which further confuses and divides the population, the majority population of Americans, as to the true state of the climate. Lots of bad news breaking headlines in a moment, but please stay with me. I want to lay out a little bit of a scenario. I've been at this for so long. I can't remember what my life was like before this battle of now over 20 years, 7 days a week. I can't do otherwise. So please bear with me if I rant for a moment. It's been a long and very, very arduous journey. And some of the summary scenarios are important to understand in between the headlines, again, which I'll get to in a moment. But the most anomalously less warm region in the entire world since about 2012 is the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48, and that's in between the record warm-ups. There's more chemical cool-downs because they're pumping in and scattering moisture over the eastern half of the U.S., chemically nucleating it. Please search the Engineering Winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for more on that scenario. And you have that cold dense air descends to the surface and keeps it cool. But even then, in those places, because of the toxic rain, things aren't doing well. There are some exceptions in some regions. Soil composition is a part of that. If you have naturally alkaline soils, they seem to be less effective than naturally acidic soils like we have in the West. But they are still affected. And the toxins in the rain are affecting root systems. That's why we have so many trees blowing over every time the wind blows. And speaking of the wind blowing, now how common is it to have hurricane force plus straight line winds all the time now? Why? Because the climate engineers are manipulating atmospheric pressure zones to ensure that the wind is blowing that hard, because that enhances the endothermic reacting elements that are in chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations. The planet is so warm now that they need that extra energy to, again, enhance the capabilities of these chemical elements to cause the surface cool down. And that's why we have massive hail everywhere now. Every storm, every large convective storm, now we have the climate engineering cover-up agencies like the Weather Channel and Weather Central all pretending that this is normal, to have baseball and softball sized hail battering everything. Why don't people ask questions? Is it head in the sand till the brutal bitter end? It seems so, because that's the process, or that's the path that we're on. Here's more deception from the gag-ordered government scientists from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Chemical Sciences Laboratory. Scientists propose guidelines for solar geoengineering research. New study focuses on feasibility and impacts of earth cooling stratospheric aerosol injection. How completely dysfunctional can a society be when the whole of the so-called academic community, the so-called experts, pretend that something so blatant and glaring as climate intervention operations raging in our skies aren't happening, and it's just a proposal? Earth cooling stratospheric aerosol injection, temporary toxic surface cool downs at the cost of a decimated planetary system as a whole, and a worsened overall warming. What a great idea this is. And let's not pretend that any of this was ever intended to be benevolent by those in power. Never. This is a weapon of mass destruction, period. Climate engineering is the covert weapon of the controllers, a weapon with which they can, are, and have been bringing populations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault. This NOAA report then states this: Studies drawing on computer modeling and observations of large volcanic eruptions have shown these aerosols would have a cooling effect similar to that of a major volcanic eruption. Research, however, they say, has emphasized the potential risks of stratospheric aerosol injection, such as changing the stratospheric ozone layer, not changing it, destroying it. And that's exactly what's happened. Based on our metering, 30% of the ozone layer remaining. Not 30% gone, 30% remaining. That sun feels like it's incredibly hot and intense on your skin and surfaces because it is. That's UVC hitting you, DNA damaging spectrum of UV radiation. That's why skin cancer is going off the scale. That's why optical problems are happening. It's very, very damaging to our eyes. Plankton is collapsing around the globe because they have to feed in the upper layers of the water column, and they're being annihilated by the intense UV radiation, as are so many forms of insects, and everyone pretending it's not happening, waving their political banners for whoever their political puppet might be, and pretending that if they could just get that puppet elected, everything would work out fine. About stratospheric aerosol injection, it includes, as I've been going over week after week, the use of polymers, microplastics, and the ecological and climate impacts of atmospheric polymers and nanoparticles are this: the accumulation of airborne microplastics, especially in polar regions. This is from a recent report, might severely disrupt the planet's ecological balance and lead to a dramatic loss of biodiversity. You think? That filling the atmosphere with millions of tons of microplastics, nanoparticles of plastic, and nanometals, heavy metals, might lead to a dramatic loss of biodiversity, especially when a primary metal involved in climate engineering patterns and showing up in, with very few exceptions, every rain test we take, aluminum nanoparticles, again, toxic to all life forms. This report then states AMPs, which are airborne microplastic particles, are degraded much faster in the upper atmosphere, the report says, than on the ground due to strong ultraviolet radiation. Just went over that, didn't I? And this degradation releases greenhouse gases and contributes to global warming. What happened to the cooling part? They skipped over that, didn't they? Admitting that it adds to warming. And about the mimicking of volcanic eruptions, again, temporary toxic cooling followed by a protracted and worsened warming. There's no benevolence in any of this. Every single fiber in the mosaic of our current reality continues to unravel by the day. The controllers of the matrix will almost certainly soon further ramp up the conflict card, much more than they already have. Always their final fallback. But now is like no other time in human history, indeed the history of the world. The consequences will be far beyond what almost any yet imagine. For those that haven't heard it yet, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. responded with a tweet on an article, a post, a report about climate engineering, saying, quote, "We are going to stop these crimes," end quote. Let's hope that Robert's in a position to actually do something. Let's hope that those around him understand that they are going down on the same ship as the rest of us. We were all passengers on the planetary Titanic at this point. Every single day counts in this battle. And for those that have not yet seen the full interview that Robert F. Kennedy did of me, with me, please search geoengineeringwatch.org, Are Chemtrails Real? You can also find this interview on the center of the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. And though I do not like and try to avoid the chemtrails term because it's the instant marginalization term for anyone from the media, anyone from any agency whatsoever, any science institution, that is their immediate, I will not listen to another word you say, trigger word. Stick to the climate science terms, climate engineering, geoengineering, stratospheric aerosol injection. Robert wanted to use that word in this exchange for this title because he felt more were familiar with this word. It's fine in personal conversation, but it should not be used in any official exchange with elected officials, again, media, agencies. Stick to the science terms if you want to gain traction. So, Robert, first, thank you so much for your help with sounding the alarm this week. Please don't stop, as we have zero time to spare. If you will but continue to address the the most dire issue of global climate disruption operations, your voice would be heard around the world. A shockwave of awakening would be triggered. We would alter the equation in the right direction. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the End of the World as We Know It broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. I stress this point because it is the only way forward, reaching a critical mass of awareness. We must reach a critical mass. And if we can, so many wheels in this battle will turn on their own as all those that are actively or passively participating realize they're participating in their own demise. We can only stop it from the inside out. A critical mass is the only way forward in this fight. We can absolutely reach a critical mass of awareness, but that will take all of us. And starting a conversation on the climate engineering issue that leads people to a credible source of data is critically important. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. This week, the dimming exceeded 25 million views. The Dimming is the groundbreaking climate engineering documentary by Geoengineeringwatch.org. Includes testimony from U.S. Air Force generals, former Canadian Minister of Defense, former governmental officials, scientists, presidential cabinet members, testing at altitude with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Flying Lab. How many people have not yet seen it? Please send them a link. Ask them to view it. Ask them to consider if they're willing to help fight to keep this boat afloat on which all of us are passengers. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. They are available on our homepage. Our printed materials we painstakingly pass along for less than our cost of producing and shipping. Our only goal, to win in this battle, to move this fight forward. I live for the day when climate engineering is fully exposed to the world, because only then can we stop it. Please help us to sound the alarm. More bad news on our superheating seas from the UK Guardian. Resorts on Spain's coasts are struggling with invasion of jellyfish as seas warm. Why would that be? As I've covered so many times in this broadcast, our oceans are hurtling toward what's known as Canfield Ocean. If they reach that point, we will all be gone. But that's a lifeless, superheated, stratified, oxygenless, superheated dead zone in the ocean, and jellyfish are much more resilient to this type of environment. So the fact that they're expanding and overrunning certain regions is a very, very bad harbinger. Keep that in mind. From BBC, millions told to evacuate as typhoon batters Japan. Japan has issued its highest level alert to more than 5 million people after the country was hit by one of the strongest typhoons in decades. Here's a question. As Japan now recently again is not completely cooperating with U.S. hegemonic dictates, is this another shot across their bow? Is that what the Fukushima incident was? Because at that time in 2011, Japan was beginning to ally with its regional partners, and suddenly they were devastated. How many think that those in power would not use environmental weapons like this to carry out their enforcement, if you will? Of course they would. Why wouldn't they? And blame it on nature. From the Wall Street Journal, this: the summer is so hot, workers are wearing high-tech ice packs. They say new technologies are making what had seemed like science fiction possible as jobs keep people outside for long periods. So that's the fix. Who cares if we superheat the planet into a living hell? Just get a new tech ice pack. Everything will be fine. Moving on, more mind-numbing idiocracy and partial truths from the so-called climate science community. This is from Scientific American. Corn sweat and climate change bring sweltering weather to the Midwest. So it's that corn that's causing the problem. Just like the beavers were causing the warming in the Arctic and all the other ridiculous conjurings from the climate science community. Is there humidity from crops? Yes. Does that even belong in an equation with such bigger factors in it? No, it doesn't. Climate change, is what we're experiencing, the earth changes we're currently experiencing, is that some part of just a natural cycle? No. it is not. Does the planet go through natural cycles? Yes, of course it does. Again, back to my example of running someone over in a crosswalk, then jumping out, shooting them, beating them, burning them, and claiming they died of a heart attack. That's not natural. The earth changes we're experiencing right now are absolutely without question the result of human activity, with climate engineering at the top of the list, but by no means the only factor. If we're to have credibility in this battle, which is imperative, we won't move this fight forward without it, we have to have a credible dissemination on this subject. We have been horrible stewards of the planet. In regard to the current earth changes, how could there be no effect? With incinerating over 100 million barrels of hydrocarbon every single day, not to mention the energy that goes into digging it up in the first place. And by the way, in that equation, let's cover that. In fact, I have in previous broadcasts, but in the year 1900, 1 barrel of oil, the energy contained in 1 barrel of oil, and I'm going to get to some interesting statistics on that energy later in this broadcast, but 1 barrel of oil could get 100 more out of the ground. Now it takes 1 barrel to get 5 out of the ground. 95% reduction. How long does anybody think that equation can continue? And we're going through 26 million tons of coal every single day. How could that not have an effect? But it's just the corn, or it's just the beavers, or any other ridiculous excuse from the so-called climate science community. They literally stated it was the beavers causing warming in the Arctic because they were damming the streams, as if that outweighs, I don't even have the words anymore. But on top of all this, what's missing from this kind of headline? Always missing. The climate engineering elephant in the equation that causes temporary toxic short-term cool downs for the sensationalized headlines the power structure uses to divide and confuse the population as to the true state of damage to the planet, while causing an even worse overall meltdown. These same particles that block the sun during the day trap the heat at night, destroying the ozone layer, disrupting the hydrological cycle, contaminating virtually everything, killing forests and crops with the bioavailable metals that I mentioned earlier. None of this mentioned by the so-called climate science community. What kind of dysfunctional society is this? A degree at this point is nothing more than a certificate of indoctrination. And I'll get to more headlines. I have plenty here, and I cover so many in every broadcast, but sometimes I just need to rant. This is all I live every single day, on my mind, all day, every day, from the moment I wake up to the moment I catch a small bit of sleep, and when I go out and trek through the forest to see how bad the damage has become, and it's worse every single day. A rant is appropriate at some point, isn't it? It's a circus of insanity. I truly feel I'm living on a planet of the clinically insane and the morally bankrupt, with a few exceptions, and those exceptions know who they are. You know who you are, and you know I'm not talking to you. If you don't know that, perhaps time to evaluate your perspectives. How much have you actually done to find out what's going on in the world? And I don't mean matrix media circus of the politically absurd. Not that. Please investigate. Please. It's up to all of us to investigate. We will all sink or swim together. About the freeze-fry extremes, please search this report. It's not new, but it's more relevant now than ever. Geoengineering creating freeze-fry extremes. You can search geoengineeringwatch.org, geoengineering creating freeze-fry extremes. About a 15-minute video report, very informative. It's exactly what's happening right now. Frying the U.S. West in order to cool parts of the Arctic and the eastern U.S. Who gets to make that kind of choice? Who gave them the right to make that kind of a choice? And when you search, probably better not to search on Google, because they are doing everything they can to hide all of our data. Again, including the dimming, now over 25 million views, and my deepest gratitude to everybody that has helped us to make that happen. From technologyworks.com, global food production is being limited by a lack of pollinators. No surprise, the scientists reached their conclusion by conducting a statistical analysis. On the bright side, they say, scientists believe current yield deficits could be remediated with an increase in pollinator visitation across individual crop fields. Really? Who would have imagined? So let's get this straight. If we didn't have the problem of dying and crashing pollinator populations, we wouldn't have a problem of dying and crashing pollinator populations. What an incredible stroke of brilliance for the so-called science community. Keep in mind, bees also dying of aluminum. Please search bees/aluminum peer-reviewed science study. Not disputed. Bees are dying of massive aluminum exposure, so are countless other insects, of course, but the study was done on bees. They can't even find their way back to the hive. If anybody thinks we're not breathing the same metals, think again. From the Weather Channel, climate engineering cover-up cast of criminals. Rare August snow graces California mountains. Exactly the kind of sensationalized headline I mentioned. It was coming last week. It happened. So in between triple-digit temperatures, a chemically nucleated batch of moisture comes in, headlines created, population confused, back to triple digits, mission accomplished. That's how it works. From Newsweek, California forecast shows snow in August for the first time in 20 years. Again, same category of headline. The National Weather Service office in Hanford, California warned of an unusual weather pattern, they say, set to bring snow to the Sierra Nevada. Next, rain forecast for California City as temperatures plunge. They plunged, all right, where I live on the east side of the lake, again, from triple-digit temperatures down to, I believe, 49 degrees last Saturday and right back up to over 100. And scheduled to stay over 100 for the foreseeable future. Welcome to climate engineering, a.k.a. weather whiplash, a.k.a. weather warfare. Meanwhile, in Minnesota, from Fox News, Twin Cities broke daily temperature record. The heat index in Minnesota hit 120 degrees while it's snowing in California. Nothing wrong here. Nothing to see. Move on. Heat index of 120 in Minnesota. While California gets dropped down to such low temperatures that some chemically nucleated snow fell in the Sierras. Newsweek, several feet of hail falls in Colorado in only 15 minutes. Does that sound normal to anybody? Several feet of hail in 15 minutes is from Newsweek. The storm even created hail fog. What the hell is that? Which is an unusual type of fog, they say, that happens after a heavy hailstorm, especially the chemically nucleated kind, right? Have you ever heard of hail fog? Yeah, AccuWeather posted this with a video as well. From ABC Australia, Tasmania on track for warmest August since records began, despite snow and wind in the final days of winter. Same scenario playing out on the other side of the world. Bamboozle the population that just baked through a record warm winter, because it's winter there, and throw in a little nucleated snow at the end, and they'll forget all about that record warm winter. They say warmest into winter since records begin. So why is it so cold right now in Tasmania, they ask, question mark. They say a series of cold fronts have crossed the state over the past few days, leading to damaging winds. There's the winds I mentioned. They make sure that happens because they need that extra energy to enhance the endothermic reacting elements they're seeding into the clouds. Rainfall and some snow across the state. Welcome to chemically nucleated winter weather whiplash. From the Washington Post, a rare deluge could hit parts of the Sahara that almost never gets rain this time of year. Some parts of the Sahara Desert will see 5 times their average August and September rainfall. A few areas could experience rain for the first time on record in August or September, chemically cooling that region. Also from Newsweek, Hawaii braces for double blow from tropical cyclones, aka hurricanes. Keep this in mind as I've been over in former broadcasts. The U.S. military's hurricane manipulation operations began in 1947, Project Cirrus. With atmospheric pressure zone manipulation, they can make or break these storms whenever they choose. So we can speculate about the agendas and objectives with baking certain parts of the world, deluging certain parts of the world, allowing certain cyclonic rotations to spin and make landfall, obliterating other storms like Edward, allowing it to spin out in the Atlantic so they could cool down the surface a little bit and create some sensationalized headlines there. We can speculate about agendas and objectives, but the fact that the weather makers have that much power over the planet's remaining life support systems is not disputable. Not if the science is truly investigated. From USA Today, the tropics are broken. So where are all the Atlantic hurricanes? Question mark. So far this year, the report says, including the 3 that are spinning Monday, there have been more storms in the Pacific than in the Atlantic, and that's a bit of a surprise, forecasters say. Again, they can change the schedule. They can make or break the storms. If you want to see hurricane manipulation firsthand, please search geoengineeringwatch.org hurricanes. There's about a half a dozen reports in that category. Search somewhere besides Google, but you will be shocked at what you learn and what you see. Absolute proof of manipulation, frequency transmission manipulation. From AccuWeather.com, Northeast faces mix of hot air and powerful storms. They say it will feel more like the middle of summer for parts of the Northeast through midweek as severe thunderstorms clash with temperatures in the 90s, pushes the heat index much higher. What is scheduled right now for the first half of September? The western U.S. frying, baking under record-shattering temperatures. Eastern half of the U.S. below normal. That's not nature. It is absolutely not nature. Again, please search geoengineeringwatch.org. Geoengineering is creating freeze-fry extremes to learn much, much more about what will be going on beginning part of September. Moving on from couriermailaustralia.com, Queensland weather, winter heat wave to see temperatures almost 15 degrees C above average. That's almost 30 degrees Fahrenheit above average. Winter records could be obliterated, the report says, over coming days as winter heat wave blasts Queensland, sending temperatures soaring towards 40 degrees C. Again, almost 30 degrees Fahrenheit above average. Do we see any of this on Matrix Media? Any of it? Through the non-stop scripted political idiocy, the theater of the absurd. From weatherzone.com, Australia's highest winter temperature on record, 41.6 degrees C. That's hot. That translates to about, I believe, 105 or 6 degrees Fahrenheit, something in that range, in the middle of winter in Australia. From Reuters, nature is pushing us. Drought imperils farmers and bees in Mexico's north. No mention of the aluminum killing the bees. Again, search bees/aluminum. You'll find peer-reviewed study to prove what I just stated. And about all those refugees that are migrating across the borders, I know this is a very sensitive subject, and I know there's some bad elements among these people, but you can't label them all that way. These are refugees. It's happening all over the world. And when you have the mega powers destroying the climate system, making it impossible for people to grow food in so many regions, what are they going to do? What are people doing right here in our own country, on our own streets? I'll get to that in this broadcast because that's an incredibly tragic scenario now that's been made worse by an incredibly immoral new law. I'll get to that again. But how many ignore this? How many that, especially in urban areas, that don't see how badly the environment is completely imploding, pretend that food comes from Walmart and McDonald's? It doesn't. No functional environment, no people. From BBC, digging riverbeds in Zimbabwe in desperate search for water. That's what's going on in other parts of the world. How many Americans have a clue? How many Americans want a clue? How many in first world nations want a clue when they don't have to face this? Not yet, but they will soon. People scratching in the bottom of a dry riverbed to find a drop of water. And the single biggest hydrological factor disrupting part of this equation is climate intervention operations. It must rain more on a rapidly warming planet, more overall, not less. Atmosphere holds 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. Why isn't it raining more overall? Yes, there's deluges in many areas. Climate engineering is, the drought deluge scenarios are the hallmark of these operations, period. I've stated that for 15 years. But overall, more drought than deluge. Impossible without a factor. We're not being told about that factor is climate intervention operations. This report from BBC states this: one of the worst droughts in living memory. They always say that as well because they want you to think it happened before, even if it didn't. Because if it happened before, it must not be that bad. Nothing new, right? Wrong. It hasn't happened before. They say this drought is sweeping across southern Africa, leaving close to 70 million people without enough food and water. In northern Zimbabwe, a community and their livestock are gathered on a bone-dry riverbed. Armed with shovels and buckets, the men are digging into the river floor, desperately trying to extract the last drops of water from it. How many Americans know and how many care? How many care while they're waving their political flags, pretending that the rigged elections, those in power are not going to allow some election gone wrong to disrupt the power that they've been building on for centuries? How easy is that to figure out? The last elected official to actually draw a line in the sand? John F. Kennedy. How long did he live? Think about it. From the Center for Media and Democracy, Koch invests in massive land grab from West African herders. What happens when you can cut off the rain, completely annihilate an area with drought, and then you can pick up the property for almost nothing. An investment arm of the largest private company in the U.S., Koch Inc., formerly known as Koch Industries, is investing in an agricultural business venture that will provide corporations with carbon offsets, a total sham, while pulling local natural resources from almost 7.2 million acres, that's 2.9 million hectares, of land in 3 West African countries. The project, led by U.S.-based company African Agriculture Holdings, a front company, will consume large amounts of water in a drought-prone region and prevent the land from being used for subsistence farming in order to grow cattle feed for export and provide corporations needing to offset their CO2 emissions with carbon credits. Carbon credits are total sham. When we have forests around the globe right now, including the Amazon, including boreal forests in the north, like that's around me, they are no longer carbon sinks, they're carbon sources. I've stated that for 10 years. Now the climate science community is finally admitting to it. There's no carbon offset here. Smoke and mirrors, just like the COP climate conference is smoke and mirrors, and behind closed doors, they are forcing countries to actively or passively participate in the climate engineering insanity, which will be our final nail in our collective coffins if it's allowed to continue. From PortugalResident.com, Azores, agriculture hit by drought. Producers lose up to 70% of crops. Islanders warned about risk of wildfires as well. Up till now, uncommon in the Azores. When you can cut off precipitation from any region and the precipitation that does fall is toxic, you're going to have dead flora and firestorms that you've never seen before. That's exactly what's happening. From the LA Times, violence over water is on the rise globally. A record number of conflicts erupted in 2023. How well that serves the power structure. Divide and conquer. Let the populations kill themselves when they don't have enough to eat or drink. That equation isn't hard to figure out, is it? From foreignpolicy.com, aid and climate policies are a world of let's pretend. Yes, they certainly are. They say aid to Africa and the climate conference circuit are fundamentally flawed. No, they're absolutely a facade. That's what they are, requiring an overhaul of the international institutions' missions. It's crime syndicates. That's who runs the world. State-sponsored crime syndicates. Time to wake up. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 473, August 31st, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations, known as geoengineering. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. As I state every week, Geoengineering Watch wishes to express our deepest gratitude to those that have helped us to expand our reach and thus our voice in this desperate, increasingly desperate, last-hour effort to sound the alarm. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities, as I stated earlier, now with over 25 million views on YouTube alone. The best way to share our documentary is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much bigger audience. About reaching those that still aren't looking up, again, one way. Start the conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising printed materials and apparel, which can be found on our homepage. Our only goal is to provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Start the conversation. That can be the key to the door. Extremely high-quality printed materials with shocking images. Again, we pass this printed material on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. Shocking images. They gain people's attention very quickly. We now have new Geoengineering Watch hoodies, shirts, photos of both are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards and bumper stickers with a scan code that goes straight to The Dimming or straight to our homepage. Very easy to pass those along. They're all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. Again, reaching a critical mass of awareness, only way forward in this fight. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch t-shirt or hoodie, ideally in some crowded location, please send us your photo so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation, which is now part of our materials page. The images encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important last-hour effort to sound the alarm. To all those that are steadfastly committed to exposing and halting the climate engineering insanity, regardless of your individual circumstances and challenges, you're still committed to this fight. And to each of you, you have my deepest gratitude forever and ever. Team effort. From AnthropoceneMagazine.com, the world's fisheries are in more trouble than we think. New research finds the danger of overfishing, they say, is understated by scientists advising policymakers. That's only one small part of the equation. The oceans are dying. If nobody was fishing anywhere, the fishes of the sea are still collapsing across the board. Same with crabs. How about the 11 billion crabs that disappeared last year? They didn't disappear, they died. They now know they died. It's what Geoengineering Watch stated would happen long before the climate science community admitted to it, because the oceans are superheating. There's regions in the Arctic Ocean that are 25 degrees, have been recorded at 25 degrees above normal on recent occasions. That's off the scale. It's inconceivable. A cubic meter of seawater can contain 4,000 times the thermal energy of a cubic meter of air, and the oceans have been absorbing this heat, and they're about done. That heat's now being released into the atmosphere, and the climate engineers are desperately trying to hide it, a problem which they helped to create in the first place. And what's their solution? Just do more of what you did that further fueled the problem to begin with. Is that not the true definition of insanity? And there's more with the collapsing fisheries around the globe. And as far as them saying it's worse than we thought, how many times have I stated in this broadcast that what you're being told, what seems like alarming news, is actually not as bad as what it really is? It's far worse than we're being told. I've said it over and over and over on so many issues, and now that's being admitted to because they want to tell the truth now? No. Because they can no longer hide it. From the UK Guardian, quote, like doomsday, why have salmon deserted Norway's rivers, and will they ever return? Question mark. Short answer, no. The report says the spring salmon did not come back from the ocean, raising such alarm over the collapse of the salmon population that rivers in central and southern Norway were abruptly closed for the first time. Sounds like parts of the western U.S., doesn't it? Fish dying across the globe. And when you see a science article that pretends that if they just do a little habitat restoration, a stream here and there, that everything's going to be magically okay, total, absolute nonsense. From Yale 360, aka Yale University, hundreds of ancient viruses discovered deep inside Tibetan glacier. Let's ponder that one for a moment. So we're going to blame nature again for all these viruses that keep popping up everywhere, and certainly that's a power structure institution, Yale. And we're not even going to question what the 400 plus level 4 biolabs all over the globe are cooking up in their labs. It's just the glaciers melting. When will populations open their eyes and realize the entire matrix is being run by state-sponsored criminal cabals? And they see populations as a rapidly increasing liability, and they now know from headlines like this that people accept as being legitimate, that they can say anything they want, so long as it comes from some sort of recognized institution where they issue certificates of indoctrination for all those who graduate. And those people are rewarded if they go along with the program. They move up the ladder. That's how it works. And how many are willing to do that? How few value the only possession that any of us actually truly owns: our honor, our virtue, our morality. And how quickly so many are willing to sell that to the highest bidder. From theweek.com, the Arctic is a ticking mercury bomb. Yes, it is. And there are many sources from that. Again, some of these sources some of the media sources try to blame this on nature in some way, but we have so many anthropogenic causes for this, human causes for this contamination, including the nuclear contamination on places like Greenland, where the military-industrial complex buried all kinds of nuclear material, just like they did in the South Seas, with nuclear repositories on islands that are now sinking under rising seas that will be contaminating everything there soon. This is what industrialized, militarized society is. A death sentence in its current form. That's exactly what it is. From Reuters.com, scientists in Chile question if Antarctica has hit a point of no return. Short answer, yes. No, it hasn't just hit the point. It's long past that point. They say nearly 1,500 academics, researchers, and scientists specializing in Antarctica gathered in southern Chile for the 11th Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research Conference this week to share the most cutting-edge research from the vast white continent. Nearly every aspect of science, from geology to biology and glaciology to arts, was covered, but a major undercurrent ran through the conference. Antarctica's changing faster than expected. Everything is worse than expected, isn't it? How is it that the whole of academia didn't know what Geoengineeringwatch.org knew? And how many are still, unfortunately, desperately clinging to narratives like it's planetary cooling or coming ice age? That doesn't help the cause of climate engineering. Facing the fact that what's unfolding at this moment is not just, quote, global warming or, quote, climate change. It's an abrupt climate collapse being further fueled by climate intervention operations, but that is not the only cause. It's a this and that equation. Imperative to have your equation correct. Earth's life support systems are imploding at blinding speed, and there are countless causes. We've been abysmal stewards of this planet. Climate engineering at the top of the list. Next, new from SciTech Daily and many other sources. This is very sobering. Earth's temperature could increase by 25 degrees. Startling new research reveals that CO2 has more impact than previously thought. So does climate engineering. Far more than any science anybody has revealed, and they say nothing about that either. They say analysis of Pacific Ocean sediments show doubling atmospheric CO2 could raise Earth's temperature by up to 14 degrees, that's C, exceeding IPCC predictions, IPCC largest scientific panel ever created on any subject in human history. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That is simply an organization whose task it is to mask the true severity of what's unfolding until the last possible moment. They say with historical data indicating significant future climate impacts from 25 degree Fahrenheit rise, we won't be here. We'll be long gone. In fact, based on all available paleo data, a temperature rise of as little as 3.5 degrees C, less than or just over 6 degrees Fahrenheit, is enough to cause human extinction. And that doesn't mean it happens the moment you're over that threshold, because it appears we are over that threshold now. Again, we're back to the human race, occupants of a motorhome with a refrigerator full of beer and pizza, who drives out in the middle of the Sahara Desert, runs out of gas, and thinks they're fine because they still have a refrigerator full of beer and pizza. No, that's not rational thinking. Doubling the atmospheric CO2 levels, they say, could raise Earth's average temperature by 7 to 14 degrees Celsius. Again, that's 13 to 25.2 degrees Fahrenheit, according to sediment analysis from the Pacific Ocean. Game over at far less than those temperatures. Keep that in mind. And if you think those in power would tell you, if you think all the so-called science institutions that are controlled by the power structure is going to panic the herd before they're ready for the herd to panic, think again. They're going to lie to you. They're going to tell you it's somewhere off over the horizon, somewhere into the future. Might have a problem in a decade or two, as if that's not alarming enough, when in reality it's kicking in the front door now. From InsideClimateNews.org, surging methane emissions might, a sign of major climate shift. Oh, too late. Already there. How long have I been talking about the methane emissions? And what does this study say? New studies suggest global warming boosts natural methane releases. Do we need scientists to tell us that, when we know that methane that's frozen and thaws will release? It's been happening in the Bermuda Triangle for how many decades? That's what that is. Seafloor methane deposits thawing and releasing, aerating the water like a bottle of champagne. Any surface vessel over that, like a ship, has no buoyancy, goes to the bottom intact. And they're pretending that they've just figured this out. They say, which could undermine efforts to cut emissions of greenhouse gases from carbon fuels and agriculture. They say a new trouble spot is in the Arctic, as if we didn't know that from a decade and a half ago, when Geoengineeringwatch.org is publicizing the Siberian methane craters blowing out in the Arctic tundra. They say where scientists recently found unexpectedly large methane emissions in winter, And globally, the increase in water vapor caused by global warming is slowing the rate at which methane breaks down in the atmosphere. It means it lasts longer. They say that methane is 80 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide, but that's over a 20-year period. Over a 10-year period, it's 120 times more potent. Over a 1-year period, it can be hundreds of times more potent, and that's the equation we're dealing with. But nobody wants to face this issue. And about cows and methane, and cows are an issue they use to polarize people because people don't want to forego their steaks and hamburgers. The real problem with methane is not cow flatulence, but cutting down forests to raise cattle, that's a problem. And that's what people don't consider. Yes, the horizon does indeed look bleak. There are many more bad news biosphere breaking headlines, but forgive me, there's a right here, right now issue that I need to address. What about those that are living the nightmare right now? An important update on those among us that have no home, aka the homeless. Supreme Court gives cities in California and beyond more power to crack down on homeless camps. For the record, the homeless know and care far more about climate engineering than the parade of air-conditioned new cars that pass them by in the street pretending they don't exist. Homeless people and their advocates say that this decision from the Supreme Court criminalizes poor people for simply existing. And I would agree. The U.S. Supreme Court recently granted cities more power to arrest, cite, and fine people who sleep outside in public places, overturning 6 years of legal protections for homeless residents in California and other Western states. The much-anticipated decision means cities no longer are prohibited from punishing unhoused residents for camping, even if they have nowhere else to go. That's the bottom line, isn't it? The court also rejected the homeless respondents' claim that ordinances banning people from camping when there's no shelter available essentially criminalizes the very act of being homeless. How many demonize the homeless from their own personal comfort zone when they know nothing about their plight and have never lifted a finger to find out, let alone help out? Let's hope that somehow Gavin Newsom one day ends up on the street where he belongs. But this isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. Rather, it's one of compassion and morality, both of which are now increasingly rare. In my past, before focusing all on this 20-plus year battle against the climate engineering insanity in our skies, I worked part-time as a volunteer in a homeless shelter for several years. I've listened to countless testimonies. Bottom line, any of us could be in their shoes given the wrong set of circumstances. On my trip into Redding, California this week, I found very few homeless. As always, I stopped to try and provide some help to those I did see. Cases of granola bars, backpack, sleeping pads, insulated water bottles, whatever I can pass on that might provide a bit of relief for them, including listening to their testimony and shaking their hands like I mean it, because I do. So about the new law I mentioned a moment ago, again, that in essence makes it illegal to be homeless, even if you have absolutely nowhere else to go. This week, Manny, a very mild-mannered homeless man in his late 40s, in a very quiet voice at my prompting, told me why his face was so bruised and battered. 2 days earlier, he was sleeping in an out-of-the-way corner when the authorities routed him out. Manny managed to pick up and carry all of his few personal belongings, but was told by the authorities that he had to also pick up and carry away the belongings of another homeless individual who wasn't present at that moment. When Manny tried to respectfully decline, because homeless have a creed of not confiscating each other's belongings, Manny was tackled to the ground and a knee pounded over his face. He was then issued a ticket that included a fine and threatened with arrest if he did not go inside somewhere, even though there was nowhere to go, or get out of town. This is but one small example of what our so-called culture has become. And though I absolutely don't agree with the actions taken by authorities in this case and others, in the end, they're only doing what the societies they serve are demanding of them. Societies with individuals that drive around in their air-conditioned cars on the now hellishly hot days, ignoring the climate engineering as well, and hellishly hot nights in Northern California, and they don't want to see anything that makes it harder for them to deny the fact that the industrialized, militarized society that they serve is deteriorating rapidly. So very many absolutely don't want to hear the truth about anything that matters. They want lies, an endless stream of lies. They want forever rising stock market numbers, no matter how ridiculously illegitimate and orchestrated those numbers are, and the shiny metals that they hoard won't save them. What they don't want to hear about is, again, the planet's collapsing life support systems, or about the gross unsustainability of the current carbon fuel carnival, about the weather and biological warfare being carried out in our skies. Many, understandably, have battle fatigue as the effort to expose the insanity and the criminal cabals that control it drags on and on, seemingly only getting worse, not better. How deeply I understand and am familiar with battle fatigue to the core. For, again, well over 20 years, I've been marching forward in this fight. Before that, other battles. Non-stop. I've never left my appointed post. Not once. But no matter how fatigued we are, we would do well to consider the plight of the passengers on the Titanic and ask ourselves this question: did they have the option of sitting down and taking a break as water gushed into the ship and over the decks? I think not. I would offer this perspective to consider. We, all of us, each of us, are passengers on the planetary Titanic. The ship is sinking by the day. Now more than ever, all are needed to summon the courage and strength to press on in this all-important battle for all that matters, for all that we hold dear, indeed for life on Earth itself. Yes, the horizon we face is that bad. Though there are countless forms of insanely destructive human activities, all driving nails into our collective coffins, the single most destructive and dangerous of all, short of nuclear cataclysm, is the ongoing weather and biological warfare being carried out in our skies via the jet-sprayed atmospheric aerosol dispersions. If we dare to hope that we have any chance of keeping the proverbial boat above the waterline, aka salvaging what is yet left of the planet's remaining life support systems, the effort will take all of us. Now. Tomorrow is too late. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Please make your voice heard while it can still make a difference. Make every day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.